At my husband's funeral, my son Danielle stood at the podium with a trembling voice and thanked another woman. He called her the one who was truly family. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Surely he meant to say my mother. Surely he was about to honor the 40 years I had given to that man lying in the casket. But as Daniel's words echoed through the chapel, every pair of eyes turned toward the woman in the front row, the one with the fitted emerald dress, the flawless makeup, and delicate tears shimmering like tiny diamonds on her lashes, Linda Mallister. She nodded politely as people stared, her face a perfect mix of grief and grace. And me, the real wife, the mother, I sat off to the side, unnoticed, invisible. Robert died in a car accident 2 weeks ago. They said it was quick. A rainy morning. Brakes failed on a curve. The car crashed into a supermarket wall. The doctor told me he didn't suffer. I remember thinking, I'm not sure he deserved such a gentle ending. We'd been married 40 years. It wasn't a fairy tale, not romantic, not exciting, but I thought it was solid. Like an old house weathered by storms, worn on the outside but still standing. I gave up everything for that house. For us. My career, my friends, even the version of myself I once loved. Robert always said, "You don't need to work, Maggie. I'll take care of you." And foolishly, I believed that was love. At the funeral, I wore his favorite charcoal gray wool coat. The wind was bitter. My fingers were numb as I greeted the guests one by one. Robert would have liked that. The dignity, the order, the proper farewell. He always cared about appearances. What people thought of him mattered more than how we lived behind closed doors. Even in death, I found myself maintaining that perfect image for him. Daniel stood at the podium, our only child, 33 years old, sharp dark suit, clean-cut hair. He looked like his father, serious, controlled. This, after a beautiful speech about Robert's achievements, he paused, then he said it, that line that tore through the quiet like a knife. "There's someone I want to give a special thank you to, someone who stood by my father through his toughest times, Miss Linda Mallister." A soft murmur rippled through the room. Linda rose from her seat and dabbed her eyes with a tissue. She smiled faintly, nodded to my son, then sat back down. And all I could do was stare. The sound drained from the world. I couldn't even feel my hands anymore. Linda? That name had lived in our home for years. Robert's administrative assistant, later promoted to consultant, then to partner. Every time I asked, he brushed it off. "She's competent, Maggie. Don't be paranoid." I remembered the company party. She brought me a glass of wine, soft-spoken, charming. I dismissed her as another sycophant climbing the ladder. How ironic. Now she sat in the front row, practically family. And my son had just thanked her for loving his father. When the ceremony ended, people lined up to shake my hand. He was a good man. "We'll miss him dearly." I nodded, automatic, mechanical. Then, as I reached for a cup of tea, I heard Daniel whisper to Linda, "You're the one who's truly family." I nearly dropped the cup. It hit me then. This wasn't my husband's funeral. It was the funeral of the life I thought I had. A hidden world had surfaced, and I was nothing more than an unwanted guest at its unveiling. That night I sat alone in the living room. Robert's chair still stood at the dining table, the same one he'd sat in every night, hand on the armrest, waiting for me to bring his soup. Now it was empty, cold. His favorite beer still sat in the fridge. 6-pack, same brand I never liked. Too bitter. He used to say, "It's an acquired taste." Maybe bitterness was something he'd always enjoyed. I didn't sleep. I opened our old photo albums, us, young and hopeful, his eyes bright, mine full of trust. I even found my old employee ID, back when I worked as a financial consultant at his firm. Short hair, confident smile. Then I remembered the day he said, "Quit. You don't need this anymore. I'll take care of you." And I did. I quit. I surrendered. For years, I believed that was devotion. But as I closed that album, I realized something. It had been the first sacrifice in a long chain that only benefited him. The next morning, I sat in a lawyer's office, the one Robert had appointed before his death. The air smelled of paper and old wood polish. Sunlight sliced the floor through dusty blinds. The lawyer's voice was deep, deliberate. Pursuant to the will signed by Mr. Robert Des Smith, the majority of assets, including the main residence in Summerall, the vacation property in Nantucket, and the remaining balance of his accounts, shall be inherited by Ms. Linda Mallister. The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt my heartbeat slow, then fade. Not a penny, not a house, not even a token. I turned to Daniel. He sat stiff, eyes forward, not surprised. "You knew," I whispered, "didn't you?" He hesitated only a second. Dad had his reasons. Reasons, I repeated. My throat burned. What did 40 years mean to him? He didn't look at me when he said, "He worked hard, Mom. Linda understood him. You didn't." And in that instant, I knew I hadn't just lost my husband. I'd lost my son, too. That evening, I opened Robert's closet. His shirts were still lined up perfectly, the scent of cologne clinging to the fabric. I ran my hand over the sleeves, wondering, when did he decide I was no longer family? Was it the year I forgot his favorite wine for our anniversary? Or the moment I stopped being his financial consultant and became just his housekeeper with a ring? I searched through the drawers for proof, anything to show I wasn't crazy. Old receipts, business cards, ledgers, and then in the kitchen drawer I found it, a folder addressed to Linda Mallister. Inside, a letter from a property manager in Nantucket. Date, 6 years ago. He'd bought that seaside home for her. I'd been there so many times believing it was ours. Turns out, I'd only been visiting her house. That single letter changed everything. The paper trembled in my hands as I read Linda Mallister's name printed in bold across the top. The date, 6 years ago. The address, our vacation property in Nantucket. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd served Robert dinner thousands of times, and stared at the proof that I'd been living inside a lie. He had told me the Nantucket house was an investment. He said, one day it'll be Daniel's. But Daniel already knew whose name was on that deed. That afternoon, I crossed the street to my neighbor Giselle's house. She was 78, sharp as a tack, with a garden full of roses that smelled like old summers. When I mentioned Linda's name, her face stiffened. Linda, wasn't she the woman Robert used to take to the symphony? My throat went dry. You saw them together? Giselle tilted her head. Many times. 15 years, maybe more. I always thought she was some cousin or... Well, maybe not. 15 years. Half my marriage spent with a ghost at the edge of my life. I walked home numb. Every step felt heavier, as if the street itself knew. Inside, I found a dusty cardboard box in the basement. Old photos spilled across the floor. Robert at company events, laughing, his hand on Linda's arm. He looked younger with her, happier. One picture froze me. Robert, Linda, and my teenage son, Daniel. On the corner of the photo, written in ink, "Our little family will be official one day." Something broke inside me, quietly like glass underfoot. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen and turned on the old record player. A slow jazz track filled the air. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't cry. "Maybe I've been dancing to his rhythm too long," I whispered. "From now on, it's my turn to choose the music." The flame flickered, small but alive. So was I. Morning ambience, coffee machine hissed, birds. The next day, I called an old colleague, Ruth Lanier. Back in the 80s, we worked side by side in Robert's firm, 2 women holding our own in a room full of suits. She answered on the second ring, voice bright as ever. "Maggie Smith, my goodness, I heard about Robert. How are you holding up?" "I'm surviving," I said. "Ruth, I need your help." She didn't hesitate. "Tell me." "I think Robert used company funds to buy properties for Linda. Maybe more. I need proof. There was silence, then a sigh. You're not just mending a heart, Maggie. You're opening a legal wound, but all right, send me what you have. 2 days later, I drove to her suburban house, a pale gray bungalow with wilting chrysanthemums out front. Ruth greeted me with lemon tea and that same fearless smile. Her dining table had become a war room, laptop open, spreadsheets glowing. I pulled archived payment records, she said, scrolling. See here, 3 entries labeled outside consultant support. The beneficiary? A shell company. No address, no staff. She zoomed in on a line. $50,000. Paid the same month you were home recovering from knee surgery. My stomach twisted. He'd been signing checks for his mistress while I learned to walk again. Ruth looked over her glasses. You sure you want to keep digging? Most women let it go. I smiled faintly. I've let enough go already. I saved the screenshots to a flash drive and slipped it into my purse. Car interior, sun glare through windshield, soft 60s radio playing You Only Find the Truth When You Stop Pretending. I drove home slowly. The chorus kept repeating that one line until it sounded like a promise. That night, I created a new folder on my computer and named it Evidence. Inside it, I saved the photos, the letters, the spreadsheets. When I finally hit save, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. I'm not the woman buried behind a stove anymore, I said to the empty room. I'm the legal wife, the mother, the woman who's about to rewrite the ending. Camera pans from laptop screen to candle flame. The next morning, an email from Ruth popped up. Subject: 3 suspicious transactions or preliminary legal assessment. I clicked. PDF statements filled the screen, each annotated in yellow. Quint Consulting, LLC, linked to Linda Mallister. 3 transfers totaling $350,000, each payment timed just outside the company's official audit cycles. Ruth's final note read, unless equivalent invoices exist, this constitutes potential fraud. There it was. Proof. Not just betrayal, corruption. I sat back, staring at the sunlight slicing across the kitchen counter. That's how my marriage had always been. Neat, tidy lines, hiding shadows underneath. Cue steady piano plus city ambient. That afternoon, I called a fraud lawyer, Michelle Robinson. Her voice was calm, low, professional. Send me everything you have, she said. Every document, every email, every photo. By sunset, I'd printed 50 pages and arranged them neatly in a blue folder. I drove downtown to her office, a glass skyscraper piercing the Chicago skyline. Michelle met me in the lobby, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a tailored gray suit. She flipped through the first few pages and nodded once. We can build on this. I'll be in touch soon. I looked at her, steady. She betrayed me, my husband, even my son. I want her to pay back every cent. She pushed her glasses up. Then we'll make sure she does. Music shifts. Tension rise, light percussion. The war had begun. Michelle handled the paperwork while I sat beside her in the conference room, hands clasped, pulse steady. Across the table, the firm's attorneys whispered like insects. For years, I'd been the quiet wife who served coffee at meetings. Now I was the woman everyone had to listen to. We'll subpoena the company records, Michelle said. If she used firm money, we'll trace every cent. I nodded, feeling the weight of 40 years finally shift onto someone else's shoulder. The backlash. News travels fast in Chicago's business circles. By the end of the week, my phone filled with messages I didn't want to read. You're embarrassing yourself. Why can't you let the dead rest? And then came Daniel's call, cue phone vibration sound. Mom, what are you doing? He demanded. You're suing Dad's company. You're suing Linda. I'm suing for the truth, I said quietly. She didn't hurt you. Dad made those choices. Daniel, I said, your father lied to me for 15 years. He loved her, Mom. You just don't want to accept it. That line sliced deeper than any legal threat could. He spoke with Robert's calm, dismissive tone, the same voice that used to tell me not to worry. I swallowed hard. When you were little, You used to hold on to my neck and cry whenever the ocean scared you. Do you remember that? Silence. You knew I'd keep you safe then, I said. Do you think that'd change? He didn't answer. The line went dead. I stared at my reflection in the black phone screen. For the first time, I realized how alike they were, father and son, both experts in rewriting history. The deposition, SFX, shuffle of papers, fluorescent hum. A month later, Linda sat across from me in a deposition room. Her lawyer looked slick. She looked flawless as always. Her perfume reached me before her words did. Ms. Mallister, Michelle began, can you explain the purpose of the Quint consulting payments? Linda smiled softly. They were for consulting work. Robert approved everything. Do you have invoices? Of course. She produced a neat folder of printed documents. Too neat. The signatures looked perfect. Too perfect. Michelle glanced at me. I nodded. Ruth's notes had already flagged the inconsistencies. Different fonts, mismatched dates. One signature dated the same week Robert was overseas. Caught. But Linda kept smiling. Robert trusted me. We were partners in every sense. I leaned forward, voice steady. You mean business partners, Ms. Mallister? Her smile didn't falter. We shared everything. For a moment, the air felt electric, heavy with years of unspoken things. Then Michelle closed the folder and said, Thank you. That's all for now. The wait, music, slow ticking, rain tapping windows. Legal battles aren't like in movies. They drag inch by inch. For months, I woke to emails, filings, court dates that never seemed to end. Every signature, every statement was a reminder of how long I'd lived without one of my own. Ruth kept helping quietly from home, scanning records late into the night. Sometimes we'd talk for hours, two tired women fueled by caffeine and principle. You could have ignored it, Maggie, she said once. Why fight now? Because I spent 40 years keeping peace. It's time someone kept score. The hearing, courtroom ambiance, murmurs, gavel echo. When the day finally came, the courtroom was small, almost intimate. I wore a simple navy suit, no jewelry, no pretense. Linda sat a few rows away, her lawyer whispering in her ear. The judge, a black woman in her 60s, studied us both with calm authority. Michelle opened with precision, walking the court through every transfer, every shell company, every false invoice. Then it was Linda's turn. Her attorney called her a victim of misunderstanding. She dabbed her eyes on cue. It was almost convincing until the projector displayed one of her Facebook posts, Robert in her living room, holding a slice of lemon pie. Caption, "His smile is my favorite reward." The date stamp glowed on the screen. 6 years ago, the same week I was bedridden. A quiet gasp rippled through the room. Michelle looked at the judge. Your Honor, we rest our case. The verdict. Pause. Silence except for pen scribble. The judge read slowly, firmly. Ms. Mallister, this court finds sufficient evidence of fraudulent misuse of company funds. You are ordered to repay $1,080,000 plus interest. Linda's lawyer tried to protest, but the gavel struck once, hard. ESFX, gavel echo. Fade to silence. I didn't cheer, I didn't cry, I just exhaled. The 40-year breath finally released. Aftermath. Exterior midday. Camera. Maggie exits courthouse into sunlight. Reporters shouted questions. I kept walking. Mrs. Smith, any comment? Only this, I said. The truth matters, even when it's late. The sun hit the marble steps. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel small beneath it. Music. Gentle piano returns. Back home, I made tea. No trembling hands, no ghosts. Linda had to sell the houses. Her reputation dissolved overnight. Daniel didn't call, but I knew one day he would. Winning the case didn't feel like victory. It felt like breathing after years underwater. Quiet, heavy, necessary. The headlines faded within weeks, but the silence that followed stayed. Robert was gone. Linda was gone. And Danielle had vanished into distance. Every morning I woke to the same kitchen clock, the same sunbeam across the counter, except now that light belonged to me. The new life, camera, cozy kitchen, steam rising from coffee mug. I sold the Nantucket house. I didn't want any ghosts with ocean views. I kept the smaller Summerall home, the one where everything began and ended. I planted herbs outside the window, painted the walls soft blue, and for the first time in years, I hung my own photos, not his awards. On Thursdays, I volunteered at the public library. I shelved books alphabetically, enjoyed the silence, the smell of old pages. Sometimes I'd help kids with their homework, explaining numbers the way I once balanced accounts. A young girl asked me once, were you always this calm? I smiled, no, but I learned that peace isn't something you wait for, it's something you build. Soft chuckle, page turn sound. The letter, SFX, mail slot clink, paper rustle. One afternoon, a letter arrived, and handwritten, familiar, Daniel's writing. My hands trembled as I opened it. Mom, it began. I was angry for a long time. I thought you destroyed his memory, but I see now you saved mine. There was no apology, not exactly, but there didn't need to be. Every word was a bridge. At the bottom, he'd written, can we meet? The reunion, interior cafe, light chatter, rain against window, call back to the first funeral rain. We met at the same cafe where years earlier he'd accused me of bitterness. This time he looked different, older, softer around the eyes. He ordered caramel dessert like when he was little. I ordered black coffee. You look good, Mom, he said. You too, I replied. There was a long pause, not awkward, it was just heavy with time. He took out an old photograph, the one of him as a toddler on the beach, tiny footprints trailing behind me. I used to hate the ocean, he said. You held me so tight I could barely breathe. That's what mothers do, I smiled. We hold on until they can stand on their own. He laughed, that same boyish laugh I hadn't heard in years. We talked for hours about Dad, about mistakes, about the quiet ways people love and fail each other. When we left, he hugged me. Not polite, not stiff, real. I'm proud of you, Mom, he whispered. And for the first time, I believed him. The garden, evening light, wind chime, gentle guitar. That night, I walked through my backyard barefoot. The crabapple tree I planted 20 years ago was blooming again. Last year, it had nearly died. I almost cut it down. But this spring, it was full of blossoms. Soft pink, stubborn, alive. I touched one branch and smiled. See, I whispered, what's alive shouldn't be given up on. Wind rustles leaves. I realized I'd spent a lifetime keeping everything tidy. The house, the marriage, the image. But the truth is messy, and sometimes that's where you finally grow. The reflection, voice calm, introspective, slow fade of background music. People still ask me if I ever regretted fighting back. I tell them no. Regret is for people who didn't try. I don't know what the afterlife holds for Robert, or if Linda ever thinks of me when she passes the old company building, but I know this. Truth doesn't die quietly. It breathes, even when people try to bury it.